Welcome again to our program on OY Media Scotland. My name remains Samuel Oludare Jiroko. Today, Sunday, the 27th of November, 2022, we will be having Alagba Femi Odediyi from the Yoruba Referendum Committee. And guess what we'll be talking about? We'll be looking into the balance of power tussle in multi-ethnic nations. And we'll be using Nigeria as an example. The questions that have been heard from the people and which people have been pushing right to us is that, has there been that example or evidence of the issue of fairness or equity in multi-ethnic nations? And by that, we mean the nations that has more than one ethnic nationality. The balance of power tussle, is it based on equity and fairness? We'll be dealing with that. The second part we'll be dealing with actually has to do with the Yoruba in Nigeria. As we all know, Yoruba has always been talking about restructuring, and we'll see that every 4 years, we have presidential candidates promising something on restructuring. But over the years, over the decades, we found out that those promises are just words on the top of their tongue. Will Yoruba again depend on the promises of restructuring, or they have an instrument to ensure that whoever becomes the president of the country will have to restructure that nation according to their demands? And of course, lastly, we will be talking about the Yoruba Nation Now and the challenges of that movement. Please stay on with me as I get Alagba Femi Odediyi right here on the program. Right, you are most welcome to the program, Alagba Femi Odediyi.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be part of the whole effort. And as we always say, we thank God for giving us the opportunity to intervene at this moment in our history, in Africa's history, in Nigeria's history, in Yoruba's history. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome. And we're just going straight to the business of the day. And it's talking about the balance of power tussle in multi-ethnic nations. We can cite examples of nations like Ethiopia, which is currently having some form of challenges between the main Ethiopia and Tigray. We can cite Spain regarding the Catalonians, and of course, our own Scotland, where this station is based and we are transmitting from. So we can talk about all this. But we're looking at this. Nigeria is an example of a multi-ethnic nation where we have many ethnic nationals or nationalities, if we want to put it that way. And from our history, we'll find out that to an extent, Nigeria's ethnic nationalities are sort of divided even by geographical delineation. We have the Hausas, the Fulanis, the Kanuris. They are in the northern part of the country, while further down south here, we have the Yoruba, mainly covering the area of the southwest, and of course we have some in Kogi and Kwara, and on the eastern side we have the Indigo, and of course their neighbors right on there. So to an extent, there's a sort of a natural geographical lines that have, I mean, sort of a division for the country. But if we look into our history, there have always been that tussle for balance of power. Yes, people will accuse each other. We have maybe the North accusing the East accusing the South, and the South accusing the West of being in power and not including the other ones. In fact, there's one of the NAS member which spoke of recent that, I mean, what is currently in Nigeria is that most of the heads of government agencies and apparatus, the military, the security sector, are headed by a section of the country. And he was saying that, I mean, if it's happening like that, if tomorrow he gets there, that's the same thing he will be doing. So the question for us today is that, looking at Nigeria's example, has there ever been the question of fairness and equity in selecting, electing the head of the country? And that should be inclusive of the military regimes.
Yes. The short answer is no, absolutely not. The long answer is what I will quickly delve into. But the short answer is no. There is no question of equity or fairness or justice in arriving at Nigeria's leadership at any point in Nigeria's history. That's the short answer. Now, the long answer is this. How did Nigeria come into being? We all know the story. Amalgamation, before amalgamation, there was internationality fighting and stuff. The most prominent of those conflicts were those between the Hausa and the Fulani in the north, when the Fulani took over the Hausa kingdoms and converted them into their emirates. And for the Yoruba, we already remember the Ilorin Yoruba Fulani saga. There was nothing about equity and justice in any of those things. It was just a simple question of the balance of power, the balance of forces that were existing and that were fighting each other at that time. The losing side may not like it, but that was the reality. And so, because it's a well-known subject, we won't dwell into that. So by the time of the amalgamation, there was no equity or fairness or justice in the amalgamation. Economically, it was for the South to support the economy of the North so that Britain will not have to be saddled with the economy of the entire colonies. So they amalgamated the two together to form one country. So at that time, they were running a unitary system, a unitary, just like the British. So by the time the Nigerian political activists came on the scene, they started questioning that unitarism, and so developed the idea of federalism, that because we are all different, that the way we should organize ourselves is through a federal system. And why did they come to that conclusion? Because in Europe itself, Europe also was what we now know as modern Europe, was the development of a fight for equity and justice. I will come back to that as the concluding part of the explanation. That the Holy Roman Empire was an empire of different nationalities and all that. So each of the nationalities, there was a war, they fought against each other, the famous 30-year war, which ended in 1648, I think. So each of the major nationalities now became countries by themselves. It was not at the instance of equity, justice, and fairness that the emperor, the Holy Roman, you all people, you can go your way. No, each one was able to fight for itself and develop itself. Now, most of the countries that emerged out of the Holy Roman Empire now became the colonial powers. England was a colony or was a province of Rome before, all these things we were talking about. So they became colonial powers. When they became colonial powers, and then they started fighting among each other, the First World War, again, a question of forces. And then the Second World War, when they started fighting against each other, it became virtually impossible for all of them to maintain their colonies. And then, because most of their soldiers, they relied on recruiting soldiers from the colonies to fight their wars in Burma, in all the Asia, and all the rest of it. So they were forced to reckon with the independence movement. In the process of responding to the independence movement, they had to cede political power to some locals. Now, it's not the ceding that political power is not about justice or equity. And we use Nigeria as an example. That in Nigeria, then they carried out a census and said the North is more populous than the South, both in land area and all that. In the process of defining the North, all the nationalities in the North were subsumed under the Fulani hegemony. So that was how they came about the one North. So whether you are a Kanuri or you are a Tiv or you are Yoruba, as long as you fall within the geographical space called Northern Nigeria, you are a Northerner. So that was how the British left the whole thing. And then they created the West, and then you have the Yoruba, the Edo, and the Ijaw, parts of the Ijaw in Western region, and then the Eastern region under the hegemony of the Igbo. You have the Ibibios, the Ijaw people, and all that. So they created the three regions largely in that manner. So that was how the Awolowo people came in and said, no, you can't do this, that we are not one like the English, in England, or the Welsh in Wales, or the Irish. The famous, Nigeria is a mere geographical expression. That was how they came to that conclusion, that the only way to make it happen is to have a federal system which will allow each of the nationalities some form of autonomy to govern themselves based on their own experiences. So that was the basis for the struggle for federalism in Nigeria. And they did not do it because, the natural law of equity, justice, and fairness demands that there should be no oppression of any kind. That's the natural basic law. I'm not to oppress you, you are not to oppress me. But we know in reality, human condition is a function of the power that you possess. That is where education, knowledge, power, and all the rest come into play. So if we all sit down and say, well, as created by God, we are equal, then the society will just remain like that. There will be no migration, for example. People will not leave their communities for whatever reason and migrate to another community. So what will happen was, if there is a major suffering in one community, the community that has surplus should simply, divide things up for them. But we know that was not what happened in history. At the moment, at a point when the world was being run by what they call the hunters and gatherers, people go about, hunting and gathering. It came to a point where they had to collect surplus to run their communities, so that those who cannot embark on hunting and gathering will be able to have something to live on and something to live for. So that was how differentiation came about in the different communities. So, we can preach and we can moralize about equity, fairness, and justice, but it has to be conditioned on the relative power and economic development in each community. So with the case of Nigeria, when those things had been put in place, that was how the Awolowo people came up and said, look, there are minorities in Nigeria. We are not just Igbo, Yoruba, and Hausa, Fulani. And the British said, no, there are no minorities. Even the NCNC, as if you said, there are no minorities. Then they brought out the Ijaw people. Say, okay, go and talk for yourself. And they spoke for themselves. So the British, again, the British were not operating on the basis of equity, fairness, and justice. They were operating on the basis of how do we dump this colony? How do we remove their problem from our hands without disrupting our control? That was the British mindset. So they said, okay, let us set up a commission. They set up the Willich Commission to see whether the minorities are there and all that. So the commission set up, and they say, yeah, there are minorities and they should be given the chance to run their own communities. So they should organize plebiscites and all that and all that. Now, the Northern People's Congress said no. Why? Because they wanted the One North policy to subsist. By doing that, it was not a question of equity or justice. It was simply a question of power that had been given to them by the British to control the North. So that's why they say one North, one North, one North, as long as it is under the Fulani hegemony. So they prevent till today. That's why you have the Ilorin, the Yoruba in Ilorin and Kaba provinces still in the North, because they refuse to allow them to organize a plebiscite to determine whether they want to remain with the North or come to the Yoruba in the South. So that is number one. Number two, when they did that and then they had the independence struggle and stuff like that, and then they said, okay, Nigeria can become independent after the various, even the struggle for independence itself was not dependent on equity, freedom, equity, justice, and what do they call it? Justice. That there were Nigerian so-called nationalists that were opposed to Nigeria's independence at the time it was being proposed by others. When the action group started it in 1953, the MPC and NCNC objected to it. Then they again in 1956 before they finally agreed, based on several reasons. So when they now had the election, there was no clear winner as per their own spirit. So they had to form alliances. Now, AG, APC, MPC, and NCNC. So the NCNC aligned with the MPC to form the federal government. Well, that's not equity, justice, and fairness. It's simply a question of coalition of power, the balance of forces, because the numbers added up for them to make the majority. Now, if they were going to apply equity, fairness, and justice, it would simply have been, okay, the dominant parties in the different regions retain your dominance, and in the center, we can form a national coalition, not a government, a national coalition of these parties. It is that coalition that will now run the government, comprising everybody. So it will have given a different measure to the emergence of the Nigerian states. The Nigerian state at that time will not have been a nation state as per Europe, but a multinational state as per our own realities. That will have gone far in the process of equity, fairness, and justice. So it didn't happen that way. So when the military came, when they used when they used their excuse for the January 1966 coup, they said in the West, there was a problem in the West, therefore, blah, blah, blah. So, but how did the problem in the West come about? It was not a question of equity, justice, and fairness. It was a question of balance of forces, balance of power, because the North and the East teamed up with the opposition in the West to fight against the dominant power, the action group in the West. That was the basis for the treason trial and all the things that happened. So when they came to power, the military coming to power in January 15 was not a question of equity, justice, and fairness. It was a question of, again, balance of power, balance of forces, because most of the army officers were of Igbo Eastern origin. Most of the rank and file were from the north. Yoruba hardly mattered because, at that point, at that time, everybody was saying nobody wants to join the army.
Yes, sir.
So, yes. So the Igbo officers, the Eastern officers, organized the coup. The leadership of the Senate at that time was largely Igbo of Eastern origin, Nwafo, Orizu, and all the rest of them. So they refused to hand over power to the deputy who was from the north at that time, but Zana Bukadik Charima. So the Nwafo Orizu people now decided to hand over power to the army headed by another Igbo officer. That was Ironsi. And when Ironsi got to power, one of the first things he did was to neutralize and cancel all the regions and turned Nigeria into a group of provinces, and then nationalized the civil service. And then, because there were so many Igbos in the civil service, promoted them and they became officers in all the regions in the country. That was not a question of equity, justice, and fairness. It was a question of power, balance of power, because they thought they had the control of the army behind them. Of course, unknown to them, the northern soldiers were saying, what is this? They are not going to allow it. So they organize their own forces. Remember, everyone is organizing his own forces. So
forces, yes.
They organize their own forces, killed the Ronsi regime and all that, and installed their own forces in power. Then of course, then the Igbo say they are doing this and doing that, and then they started killing each other, and then the war happened. So, and then after the war, they now said, okay, let us reorganize the political system. And then they said, we are not going to do parliamentary, we are going to do, they came to America and look at the power in the American presidential system and imported it into Nigeria. And when they imported it into Nigeria, they had the election in 1978-79. Again, there was no clear winner. The 12 True Thoughts saga. Then the East and the North also banded together, rallied their own forces. Underline that word, forces, balance of forces. There's no equity in 3 contenders, in 2 people ganging up against a third person.
Yes.
There's no equity, justice, and fairness in that. It's simply a question of balance of power, balance of forces. So that was how Shagari came to power and all the rest. And then Shagari government messed up, and then they put Buhari in power, and then he also did all he did. They removed him again, put Babangida in power, all through the present. Now in 1999, so it is mischievous for anyone to say that the question of equity, justice, and fairness should start from 1999. That's very mischievous. You can't break history into segments. Even if you break it into segments, it must reflect with the source, with the past, the present, and the future. Nigeria did not start in 1999, as I have expressed. So then we will see that what happened in 1999 was a continuation of what has been happening in 1914. So by 1999, with all the Nadeko and all the rest, and Anti-Abacha and the rest, then the military said, look, we can't afford to alienate the Yoruba people. So we have to put them in. Now, in a sense, you can say that is fairness. Why is it fairness? They had a rule. That any party that will contest the election must satisfy certain conditions. The AD of the Yoruba people essentially did not satisfy those conditions. So ordinarily, they should simply have said, no, we are not going to register you. But if they had said that, they have created more problems for themselves. And it is the problems they want to run away from. Again, it is not a question of fairness or equity. It's simply a question of power, because the Yoruba at that time had the clout, the political power, the legitimacy, and everything to fight the Nigerian state. So it is that recognition that now allowed the military at that time to say, look, let us accommodate these people. You know, the Yoruba say, Moja Mosa, nothing more, when to fight, you know when to retreat. That is how you become a general or something like that. I think that is correct translation. So they knew they had to retreat. Again, I just said, okay, for the sake of latitude, we can say it is fairness, but it is not fairness. It's simply the reality of the balance of forces, which they were not ready to confront at that time. But why I said it is not fairness is this. So when they now said, let us accommodate the Yoruba people, they now decided to choose who the Yoruba candidate will be.
Right.
So they had Obasanjo as their candidate, and the Falai Maja the Yoruba candidate. So they threw their weight behind Obasanjo, and again he won in the north and the east, the traditional opponents of the Yoruba people, and Obasanjo became head of state. If it were to be fairness and justice, all they would simply have said would that, okay, you Yoruba people, you did not meet the condition, but we want to accommodate you. Give us a candidate. So the candidate that the Yoruba chose will have become the single candidate for Nigeria. That way, you can now start talking about fairness, equity, and justice. They didn't do that. They didn't say the Yoruba should decide among themselves. They just said, okay, we'll do this and do that. So again, and that was how the whole thing went. And when Obasanjo got to power, the first thing he did was to neutralize the Yoruba political base. So, and then, we know what happened after Obasanjo, Yadra, Jonathan, and all the rest. So, when they come to campaign in Yoruba land, their major focus, and Jonathan did mention it, their major focus is to try to tell the Yoruba that they are a minority in their own land. Jonathan mentioned it several times, that the Yoruba are a minority in Ibadan. They are a minority in Lagos. Till today, many will claim they own Lagos, that Lagos is no man's land, and all the rest of it. So, if you look at it from that perspective, the question of political power in Nigeria is not based on equity, fairness, or justice. Now, you can now say, but we should advance the position that it should be based on equity, fairness, and justice. That will be the humane way of looking at it. Yes, correct. But the question is, how do we do it? So we now say the best way to do it is through federalism. That if we have a truly federal state, a multinational state, it will allow the nationalities a lot of, I mentioned something about 1999, that if the Yoruba had been asked, okay, go and produce a candidate for us, for everybody to, so it will allow each nationality to express itself to its fullest within itself, and then relate with us. So everybody can now relate on the basis of the best common factor among the nationalities. That will be equity, fairness, and justice. Now, to get to that point is not to start supporting especially a party that has nothing to do with federalism, which some have been doing in Yoruba land. Though every candidate, I will restructure, but nobody has said, okay, we are not asking you whether you will restructure or not. We are saying this is the way we want it restructured. There are two different things. You are telling us you will restructure, fine, but we are telling you what we mean by it. Do you agree or you don't agree? Nobody has said that yet. And that is what, by the way, that is what the Yoruba referendum is saying, that this is what we want to. And okay, so that's the third segment. We'll get there when we get to that.
Sure.
So that is the in a nutshell, that is what it means. So that's why I said, and I'm saying it confidently, anybody that is talking about equity, justice, and fairness in Nigeria's politics is just mischievous.
Right.
Because the history does not support it, the logic does not support it, the reality does not support it. They are just being mischievous. There's nothing like that. Now, we can say when I say we, the Yoruba, can say, but we have been shortchanged. Yes, we have been shortchanged. They threw Awolowo in prison. They made sure he didn't become president. Abiola, even though he's not quite a Yoruba candidate, they did away with him. Then what that means is that we should now look at what we are doing and how we are doing it, so that we will not achieve the same result as in the past. The Yoruba say, first time, second time, third time, so that the third time will not meet us with the same result.
Definitely.
We can address that issue. But we cannot now say, because we have been the ones that have been losing out.
Yes, yeah.
As the history has proved, we are the ones, the Yoruba, the ones that have been losing out in the contestation for power in Nigeria. So if anybody is going to demand equity and justice and fairness, it should be the Yoruba.
Yes.
So, but when you now find Yoruba people saying they are supporting somebody because of equity, they are mischievous. And I think that's the bottom line. And that, it can be defended anywhere. And they can't deny the history. So when they now start saying, somebody said, this is my turn. Tinubu said, this is my turn. Everybody is now saying, this is their turn. Atiku now said, this is the turn of the Fulani. Despite the fact that the Fulani is there. Ohaneze are now saying it is Igbo turn. Everybody is saying it is their turn. So don't vilify one for the other. If you don't like Tinubu, don't like him, don't support him. But what he said is what everybody is now saying. So the question now is, the three major candidates are saying it is their turn. Again, question of balance of forces and balance of power. Having said that, how you now ensure that your turn dominates or becomes dominant or becomes victorious, that's a different question entirely. So if you lose out at the end, anyone now, if you lose out at the end, you have not been denied your turn. It's just that you lost out. And if you want to stop losing out, then you have to devise another means to ensure that such a scenario does not arise again. So these are the reasons why I said, I don't know whether it's long enough or too long, but but that's the long answer to the question. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Alagbafemi Odedeye, for that explanation. And I think it's clear enough looking at the history. And like I said, even other nations will see that the agitation that is going on in places like Scotland, in Spain, in also in Ethiopia, and also even cite Sudan. We can look also to Cameroon, where we have the North versus the South. So we see that it's really not about fairness, it's not about equity, but it's actually national or nationality trying to ensure that they stay in power and they're able to take care of their own people first, as a priority before any other nationality. Thank you very much for that. And that takes us to the next question. You've actually kicked it off by talking about the restructuring, with the presidential candidates, talking about, yes, we'll restructure, but what restructuring? We can easily refer us back to the current president of Nigeria, Major General Muhammadu Buhari, because in the manifesto of APC then, in 2015, they did mention about to restructure the country and co. And then at a point, Buhari said, well, I didn't say it. So he disengaged himself from that promise and co. And then what we see later on was a committee led by Governor Nasser El-Rufai that was meant to look into that issue of restructuring, but nothing has come out from it. Although they also have the document from the 2014 confab, as well as I think the Willings one that you've always mentioned. Now, we know that in Nigeria, the ethnic nationality that have constantly been talking about returning Nigeria to a proper federal form of government has always been the Yoruba.
Yeah.
And almost every 4 years, we have candidates promising them to restructure the country. But over time, it's always been promises and nothing happens. Now, the question we have is that moving on to the next election, which is some few months away, will the Yoruba still depend on promises made by any of the candidates? Or will the Yoruba have something which they can use to hold whoever becomes the president accountable to restructuring the country in the way they want and not maybe just any other way? That would be the first question you'll be taking on for us.
Okay.
And the second one is, with the sort of structure we have now, that we have many states, you know, for let's say in Yoruba land, we have like 6 states with part of Yoruba people in Kogi and Kwara. You earlier mentioned that these people have been speaking to the National Assembly that they want to have a plebiscite or a referendum to choose whether they want to stay on that part or join their people. But then that has not been attended. I could remember that even either late last year or early this year, the issue came up again.
Yeah.
But the National Assembly just like, well,
ignored it.
They didn't attend to it. So the first part will be, will the Yoruba still depend on the promises by the candidates, or will they have something with which to hold, even if it's the Yoruba, the APC candidate, which happens to be a Yoruba, even if it's the one that eventually become the president, will it just be based on the promises of APC that they will restructure the country, or will the Yoruba themselves have something to hold him accountable to restructuring the country to the way that it should be? That's the first one. Then the second one is that with the structure that we have now, with multiple states as they are, is federalism achievable?
Okay, let me start from the second question,
right,
and then go back to the first. And in the process, if I forget the first question, kindly remind me, but I will try not to forget. But let me start by answering the second. No, federalism is not achievable with the present structure that we have, principally because it was set up as an anti-federal establishment. And I will say, number one, a federal system is a relationship between the center and the subnational units. That is, there will be components. The components may be territorial, they may be geographical, they may be cultural, but there has to be a component that federates with another component to create a federal system, which means who are the federating units in Nigeria? Okay, they say the states are federating units, but the problem is this: the states were not created by the peoples of the states. The states were created by the central government and then merged into what they call the Nigerian Federation. Why did I say that? I mean, we all know that how the states came into being and the local government and all the rest. But the reason why the states must be created by the peoples is that, like you said, in Yoruba land now, we have 6 states, Abi. We have 6 states. Okay. Those 6 states are now governed by 2 political parties, essentially, APC and PDP. APC and PDP are not controlled by Yoruba people or the West. The parties are controlled by the center, and you know what is happening in PDP now when they said they should do this and do that and they start fighting among each other. So what is happening at the center will now manifest in the states. So that has taken away your right as a component. And this is the reason. The Yoruba in, let's say, Osun or your state that are governed by PDP are the same Yoruba in Ekiti or Lagos that are governed by the APC. So a Yoruba existential paradigm between the Yoruba in Oyo and Osun and Ekiti and Lagos must be the same. That is, what do the Yoruba in Osun want and what do the Yoruba in Lagos or Ekiti want as Yoruba people? So we talk about language, we talk about customs, that is cultural experiences. We talk about notions of development. We talk about social relations. These are cultural, socio-cultural attributes of any people. But when you now divide it among political tendencies that are not under your control, that means the influences of those political parties will impact negatively on your cultural imperatives. So you have a party that violates its own laws. You know, said if a president comes from the south, the chairman should come from the north, or whatever it is they are arguing about. And then they violated it in a blatant manner. And the same party now comes to you and says, oh yeah, I want to rule you. What will that say about your social existential relationship with the other Yoruba in other states where they are not in control? So by virtue of its existence, the Nigerian state as it currently is anti-cultural and anti-national, that is the nationalities. So it can't create a federal system. That is just one part of it. The second part is when you what they call the Nigerian Federation, like we said in the first part, it's a question of balance of forces and balance of power. Yes. This guy came to power, Buhari came to power based essentially on an alliance between the Southwest and the Northwest, a political, again, like they did in the First Republic. So the Yoruba did it to them, although they did not get to power. So they now formed an alliance, which we now know as the APC, to put Buhari in power. And when Buhari got to power, what did he do? He just sort of sidelined the APC, which is dominant in the Southwest, and then reconfigured everything to suit himself or his region. And then what we have today. So we are now saying, now the reverse is, let's say the APC gets to power, and then we now say, should the Yoruba now take everything to the Southwest? And so by the time they take everything to each other, there will be nothing to take. But that is not even the question. The question is, what do you do with the power that you have at the center? So now that Buhari has done what he did, and he did this, he did that, which is not in favor of a federal system, anybody that gets to power after him, it's not a question of reversing what he did. That is, okay, everything you took to the north, we are taking it back. No, but reconfiguring the architecture of state. You know, when we say for the Yoruba people, and it goes for other people, when we talk about the golden era, the Western region did not depend on anything from the federal government to carry out everything they did.
Yes.
So we don't need to depend on and the only way we are depending on the federal government under this system is simply because all the revenue of Nigeria goes into the pocket of the federal government. So by virtue of all the revenue going into his pocket, it now divides it up and says, so yeah, you state get this, you state get that, you state get this. So aside from the first one that I said, the politics of the community is now residing within that community because the political parties are centered outside the community in Abuja. And then you have INEC, the National Electoral Commission, that is controlling everything in their place. And now you have the economy that pays all the money into the central account that is now shared, what they call monthly allocation and all the rest by whatever parameters. So under those three conditions, the system cannot operate a federal system. So it has to change. It has to be changed one way or the other. Those are the three major reasons why I said the present system cannot usher in anything federal. Now they now say when once it was the same military regime that said they should remove history from secondary schools or from schools. Now they say they are reintroducing history. Now, who is better? Who can tell your history better than yourself? So now you have a national history curriculum that will now whitelist whatever is to be taught. We said it, I think, last week. So for us, there's no way you can teach Yoruba history by saying Mongo Park discovered River Niger. It just doesn't make sense. So our history is embedded in our experience. So if we are going to teach history in Yoruba land, it must be embedded in that historical, the good, the bad, and the ugly of it. You can't Nigerianize that history. To Nigerianize it is to make it, actually is to deny our existence. For example, how do you Nigerianize the history of Ilorin and Afanja? You say, well, there's a rebellion between Afanja and Alafin, and somebody came and supported Afanja and took over the place. But that is not true. It is not true because the internal wars, internal crisis that led to the Afanja rebellion and the intervention of the Fulani army are part of an expansionist issue. We won't go into details of that. So you have to look at all these things. So therefore, we can cite other examples along that line to show that the current Nigeria, as it is operating, cannot simply because there are no constituent units. All the states that they made, there's nowhere in the world where a central government dictates what your local government should look like. There's nowhere except Nigeria that you now put it in the constitution that so many local governments must be in this state. So many local governments must be in that state. It's not done. It's an aberration. And you can't operate that as a federal system. We are the ones to determine whether we want the whole of Ibadan to be one local government or 50 local governments.
Yes.
That is our own problem, not Abuja's problem. So that is number one. Number two, the census. You can just have a national database, but you can't create an agency to conduct a census for everybody, because the census is simply a demographic count. So if you add your census figures in Oyo, for example, and say you are 50 million, and actually you are no more than 10 million, then if you have the revenue to take care of 50 million, so these are ways the responsibilities come forth. So everything that is happening under the system is anti-federal, and it must be challenged. Now, that is the first part of the question.
Yes.
Now, to go back to the second question, now, whether, so that, like you said, at least since 1999, okay, the Yoruba have been in the forefront for advocating a federal system right from the 1940s. The formation of, in fact, when the Egbeomo Oduduwa was founded in 1945, they are one of their part of their constitution is that they want to work for the establishment of a federal state in Nigeria, along with other people. So, and why is it so? It's not simply because of Awolowo's intellectual ability. That is part of it, because he was able to put everything together. But if you look at Yoruba history itself, one of the major issues in Yoruba history is also federalism, as it were, because we were not under a unitary system. Yes, Oyo Empire was the most powerful and the largest and all that, but all the other kingdoms also existed, even with the Oyo Empire, but not under the control of the Oyo Empire until the empire broke up and everybody started working in different directions. And then, by the time the empire broke up and the Ibadan army came into being and drove the Fulani back, what eventually became the Kiriji War was also the conflict between the unitarism that Ibadan wanted to establish and the federalism of the Ikiti-Parapo people, because the Ibadan wanted to establish their, imperial power over the rest of, and then they rebelled and then they started fighting. So it's part of our cultural praxis. Federalism is part of our cultural historical cultural praxis, which was translated philosophically and practically by Egbeomo Oduduwa into, and then became the mantra of the action group, and then for the whole land. So that is part of our DNA. Let me put it that way. It's part of our DNA. And so every time, it's always a major factor. Now, the question is, why is it that after the First Republic and the demise of the Action Group, and even after the UPN in the Second Republic, we seem to be outside the circle? Yes, we are outside the circle because the question of federalism ceased to be part of our political praxis. That was why when this Afenifere came into being under Abacha, there were some that you are saying they should not describe themselves as sociocultural or even socio-political. They should simply define themselves as a political association. Of course, the argument was lost along the way, and they declared themselves social this, social that, and all that. So by doing that, they removed themselves from the politics of federalism itself. And again, from historical example, Action Group was a political party that became dominant for various reasons in Yoruba land and championed federalism in Nigeria. By the time of 1999, the AD attempted to be the reincarnation of the Action Group. And because of this dichotomy, between the political and what they call the sociocultural at that time, AD, and then AD fell apart, with what we have said before. So the question of federalism became a question of an outsider looking in. Why did I say that? Because when the AD collapsed and one branch led by Tinubu formed the AC and then the ACN, political survival of the AC and ACN were hinged on one, getting back the West under their fold. They were contesting for office and all, which is okay. And then contesting for influence and relevance within the larger Nigerian political space. So all kinds of things, this and that they have to do and get themselves in shape. Meanwhile, the sociocultural group that saw itself as the embodiment of federalism, it's outside that struggle. That was why when the politics now comes down and the AC and the ACN are saying this is where we want to go, the sociocultural group will say, no, this guy has promised to do this, so let us follow him. They relinquished their own authority for the influence of a promise from a human being, a promise that can be broken at any time and which has consistently been broken. So the fight for federalism was no longer within the political party structure.
Right.
It became an external something. So that was why every time they say Lagbaja has promised to restructure, so let us support him. They will support him and they will lule. Anyway, that's just a funny expression to me. Anyway, so that's been the case all along, that it appears as if we have taken the question of restructuring of true federalism away from the political battlefield, and we have now placed it on the shoulders of whoever comes around to make any promise, which is even contrary to the experience of the action group or Egbe Omo Oduduwa in the early stages, or even the UPN. In the UPN in 1983, when they were forming an alliance, the PPA, Progressive People Alliance or Progressive People Party, between the action group and some northern parties to challenge the MPN, Awolowo was insistent. Why? Because he said, I'm for federalism and this and this. So the party chairman and the party candidate should be vested in him or in the West. And the northern party was saying, hey, no, if you want the candidate, we'll give you, but we will take the northern. They want to split it up. And Awolowo refused, rightly refused, because he was conscious of the history that once that one of the powers leaves the West, that is the end of the project. Because whether he's the presidential candidate and the chairman comes from the North, they will start fighting among each other. And then they will lose their chances in the West, whichever way it goes. So he knew what he was talking about because of his experience with the AG and the First Republic. So that was how the PPA or PPP collapsed, because the North refused to accede to that demand. So now, when his successors now take away that political demand from the political arena and place it in the hands of another politician who is not even a Yoruba, then there's a problem. So that is why we are saying it needed, that is we, when I say we, the Yoruba Referendum Committee, that's why we are saying it is not too late to reverse course. That the purpose of the Yoruba referendum, it has several purposes. mainly to recover that lost space. That is, okay, we are talking about federalism, we are talking about restructuring, we are talking about this. Aside from talking about it, we want to legitimize it. Once we legitimize it, no matter who comes to power, we have, because that power that he or she has is a legitimate power by virtue of the election that brought him or her to place. So he will have his legitimacy. We will also have our own legitimacy. So there will now be a contest of legitimacies. One cannot deny the other, but we can work out a system where one can appreciate the other. In addition, if we succeed in our own legitimacy quest, and then we get the other nationalities to act likewise, then the contest will not be only between the center's legitimacy and Yoruba legitimacy, but a contest between the center and the rest of us, the other nationalities in Nigeria. A contest, and there's no way the center can win that battle. So that's why we are saying, and then because our legitimacies are derived from two legitimate sources. Now, the central government, they will do their election and somebody will win power. That is the source of their legitimacy, the election. Our own legitimacy is our houses of assembly. Because they are also elected people into the houses of assembly, by virtue of that, they can conduct the referendum and it will give it its own legitimacy.
That's all right.
So the legitimacy of the people in both ways, for the president and for the houses of assembly. So now with that, whether we can now take the battle to any level we want to take it to. But that is very critically important. So that means whether PDP rules in Osun State and APC rules in Ogun State, it will not matter. Because while they are busy fighting themselves on their party platforms, we, the Yoruba people, are busy fighting on our Yoruba platform. But they will have done their bit, because if the PDP governor in Osun State assents to the bill for a referendum, it's okay. If the APC governor in Ogun State so they have done their bit.
Yes.
So the onus is on us and the assembly people to put it on the table for them. Now, if they now refuse to sign, to assent to the bill that's a different ball game entirely. But these are the processes, and this is how we can take the battle away from just being mere promises. Like you said, APC has it in its manifesto, and then Buhari got to power, and but if you look critically at it, APC is an alliance of different forces. So who knows? Maybe it is the Western forces, the Western portion that put it in there, and then they say, okay, we'll see when we get there, and then they started doing their own thing. But what's his name? Jonathan, actually a sitting government, organized a conference, but refused to do anything about it. Why? Because the people that were represented lacked legitimacy. Because when the delegates went to that conference, where it's one thing to say I have been nominated to represent a Yoruba state, because we Yoruba are demanding federalism. So I come here and start arguing about federalism. It's another thing to say I'm here as a Yoruba delegate based on the legitimacy and the legitimate demands of Yoruba people, which has been codified in this referendum. No negotiation. If we are going to negotiate, we negotiate terms of agreement. That is a different delegate from somebody who just say, yeah, let us discuss federalism. And we can be running around in circles for the next 100 years and not reach anywhere. But once we have that document, that legitimacy in hand, then the negotiation is already defined. No ifs, no buts. So that was why Jonathan was able to get away with it, because he who calls the piper dictates the tune. We have people come and sit down, talk. They talk. They fight. They did this. They did that, and then they say, "Okay, thank you very much. We'll see you later." The delegates had no one to go back to and report.
Right.
Why? Because they did not represent their people. So if they have the referendum and the results of the referendum as the basis for their representation, they will come back to the people and say, "Look, we presented it to the federal government, says they don't care." Then the people will say, "Okay, they don't care. What do we do?"
Yeah.
So these are what is lacking in all this. And it's not the Jonathan conference alone. I think it started from Obasanjo Joseph, or even under the military. They were having all these conferences and all the rest. At the end of the day, nothing happens. Why? Because none of the delegates had a legitimate stance, a legitimate leg to stand on. And that is what the Yoruba Referendum Committee wishes to correct, by creating a legitimate stand for Yoruba demands. And then we go on from there. And this has nothing to do with who wins or who loses the election. Even though it will pay also if Tinubu wins, because at that point, he will have nowhere to run. He can't have any excuse unless he wants to say, "Well, I don't care about Yoruba people." I don't think he will say that, but if he wins. But if another person wins now, then you say, "But my people have not said something." Go and tell your people to do what we have done, and then we can come back together. So it's a win-win for Yoruba people if we can get it done.
Okay. So thank you very much. So what you've actually laid out is that it will be risky for Yoruba to go into this next election without setting a legitimate tool to hold whoever becomes the president to in agreeing to restructuring the country along nationality lines.
Yes.
So that would be like not doing the same thing that we've been doing and expecting a
different result. Yes.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I think the last part we'll be taking because of our time. For those that are right on with us, Alagbafemi Odede, you will be on Yoruba Gbode later on today. We're going to hopefully share the, once they start streaming and we're allowed to share, we'll share it on Yoruba Referendum Committee's platform.
Thank you.
It will be meeting with other people on that platform. And it looks it's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, so the last part for today, I know that you've always been very careful to criticize other movements, especially other groups that are also agitating for Yoruba liberation. But in the past few days, there have been some couple of things we can call quite very, very unfortunate incidents that have been happening among some of the Yoruba agitators group, particularly the Yoruba Nation Now. I was listening to some of the people they've been using for media before now, and that includes Awikonko. We also have some other ones that are on Facebook, and these are people that have been projecting Yoruba Nation Now for, let's say, for over 1 year. But in the past 3 weeks, most of them have been criticizing the movement in which promises they've been given since early last year when they declared the force majeure on Nigerian government and Nigeria constitution. They found out that all those promises have not been met. And it seems very clear that the declaration, which has been promised because it was shifted from, I think it was end of September.
Yeah.
A letter was written to the president, and people were waiting that there was going to be a declaration after that deadline. In fact, some people were gathering to actually make that declaration themselves. But it would seem from that time is when things began to turn, because Professor Banji Akintoye did release a video telling those people not to declare anything so that they will not be under the attack of the Nigerian government, because obviously it will be considered to be felony. And also, I think that same video, or the one after, is where he clearly came out and said, listen, United Nations is not involved in this issue, which was contrary to what people believed before. Then we had the incidents of one of the leader of the groups, and that is Abiola Onitiri, who of recent said she's declared Yoruba Nation Now spiritually, even to the point that they've appointed the chief of air staff, and all those stuff. So there's been quite some ramblings with some of the even some of the officers of some of the groups resigning or stepping down, and we have to talk about it, because if things are being done in the name of the Yoruba people, whoever comes out and say, yes, I'm serving the Yoruba people, or anyone mention Yoruba people with your group, then that means we all have rights to speak about it. So the challenges they have now, because it's very clear that the declaration that was meant to be done this year is very clear that it's not going to happen. One section, like I mentioned, Abiola Onitiri, she's declared her own spiritually. People have asked that all the chief of air staff and ground force and co, are they going to operate spiritually? But also, Professor Akintoye has said by December that this year, and I think after Wednesday, the only month we have this year is December, that Yoruba Nation will be declared. But things are so uncertain. And I will remember that severally on this program, you've mentioned that, yes, it's great for people to have aspiration. It's great for people to be passionate about Yoruba cause, but also there's something they call strategy. There has to be a route that reasonably we know that this can achieve the end that is being put forward, and it should go beyond just slogans or even running propaganda. As things are now, let me pick your mind. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's very simple, actually. You see, most of these things we have discussed with many people within the Yoruba Nation Now movement. And right from day one, we have been telling them that the way they are going is not the way and cannot be the way. For one reason or the other, they decided to go along that way. See, the thing is, Yoruba people are not exceptional in the world. Why did I say? Well, everyone has his own exceptional characteristics. Like they used to say, Yoruba people are probably the only people that are able to manage religious differences without conflict and all that. Yeah, to that extent. But when it comes to self-determination or autonomy, we are not exceptional. In other words, we cannot operate outside history to say that our road contradicts everything that has happened in history. You earlier on, you mentioned Catalonia, you mentioned Scotland, you mentioned all this. It doesn't take rocket science for anyone to compare Scotland, for example, because of its importance in Nigeria, and the Yoruba self-determination movement. I think 9 of the colonial administrators or governors or administrators in Nigeria are Scottish. So they were very much embedded within the British colonial caste in Nigeria. Scotland is now demanding independence from UK. At least I haven't heard, and I don't know whether they have done so. Scotland has never written a letter to the United Nations to come and conduct referendum in Scotland for their independence. Most of the people that are saying they are asking United Nations to come to Yoruba land to conduct independence or sovereignty or whatever it is, reside in the UK. They conduct or they carry out what they call mega rallies right there in London. They live there. They know, or they should know, that the Scottish people are also demanding independence from UK. If they don't know anything at all, they know about the 2014 Scottish independence referendum, if they don't know any other thing. So if Scotland has not asked United Nations to come and conduct referendum for them, why should they think United Nations will come to Nigeria and conduct referendum for Yoruba people? So that's why I said Yoruba people are not exceptional in this struggle. Yoruba say or something like that, along that line. Yeah, there's nothing in self-determination in the world that is not known by self-determination activists in the world. Now, you may not know the nitty-gritty, how they do this, but generally speaking, we know how these things operate. But unfortunately, most of the agitators or activists in the Yoruba Nation movement simply decided to turn their backs onto history. That's why they are making all these gaffes and all that. So, the thing is, unfortunately, they are misleading a lot of Yoruba people. And that was what we said about the elections in Osun and Ekiti states the other time. When you have a contestation for power, you may not like the party in power or anything like that. If you understand Nigeria's political history, it is a contestation for power. You don't fold your arms in your local area and say you are not going to participate because you want independence, and you allow your enemy to participate in controlling you. It doesn't make any sense. Let's even forget about history or knowledge or anything. It doesn't make sense. It's as simple as that. So while you are busy disenfranchising yourself, your opponents are busy strengthening themselves. And there's nothing you can do about it. The last time they said they have Yoruba passport, you have Yoruba this, Yoruba that. Where are they going to try? Who is going to recognize it?
Yeah.
So all these things are, well, that's why they start fighting among each other. Every day we hear stories of fighting against each other and this and that and that. And then they say they want to make a declaration. We also know that it's what they call unilateral declaration of independence. To make a unilateral declaration of independence means you have the power to sustain it. Well, anybody can sit down anywhere and make any declaration. We've heard about Waco. There's this town in Texas in US called Waco, where this group called the Dravidian branch, they made their own declaration they were going to heaven or something like that, and they ended up burning themselves to death. Jonestown in Guyana in the 80s. So anybody can sit down anywhere and make any declaration. But you want to engage in a comedy like that, don't turn it into a tragedy for others.
For the people. Yeah.
For the people. You can sit down and become Baba Salah and make anything you want to make. But don't turn it into something that will become damaging to your people. If you can't do anything, just simply educate them. If you can't even educate, just keep quiet.
Right.
But don't become part of the problem. So I think a lot of what is happening in the Yoruba Nation now has become a problem. Well, not for Yoruba people, but for themselves, because things are happening, whether they like it or not.
Yes.
The elections will take place. Now, we don't know how many Yoruba people subscribe to the notion of no elections. So we don't know how many of them refuse to register to vote. But whatever it is, the elections will take place and someone will be declared the winner, whether by hook or by crook. So when that person is declared the winner, even those of you who did not vote have lost your legitimate right to protest.
Yes.
So at best, you will become another fringe irritant to whoever is in power, because you are not prevented to vote. Nobody said Yoruba people should not vote. Nobody said you should not register to vote. So you, by your own wisdom, that decided to take that route, and you cannot complain about the results. Now, you can now take on those who won the election and say, okay, well, now that you have won the election, this is what we want to do. This is what we want you to do. Well, they can say, oh yeah, let's negotiate. Or they can tell you to go and sit down. Maybe when we were contesting election, you said there should be no election. Go and sit down now. So that one will be taken care of when that time comes. But seriously speaking, I think they are doing a lot of damage to the psychology, to the history, not only to Yoruba people, but to the entire global self-determination movement itself, because they will be laughing at us.
Yes.
Are these people from Mars? How can, and you see why I'm trying to, I don't want to criticize them, but you know, most of these things we have discussed with them in private, sometimes in public, but they keep on doing the same things over and over again. Okay, so now they transited from one organization to another organization to another organization to another, this and that, and everybody is now just doing their own thing. And they keep repeating. So bottom line is this: do we need a sovereign Yoruba nation in Africa? That is the central question. And my answer to that is no, capital no. Africa does not need new sovereign nations. What Africa needs are new states, new state formation. The thing is that the boundaries that were created by colonial powers were created because of their own experience with nation states. They were nation states, so they came and created nation states. But we are a multinational community. So what will govern us is a multinational state. Now, that doesn't mean, let's say, for example, if the Igbo people say they don't want to do anything with Yoruba people, fine, let them go and do it. But we are saying that the best form for peace and development in Africa is to have a multinational state, not separate sovereign states. Because the sovereign states that will come into existence will become so subservient to the existing global order that they will just become their plaything. It has happened even with the current nation states. We see how all African countries are. Now divide them into smaller units, and then you can just imagine what will happen. So the question is not an emotional one, whether we don't like the Fulani, we like the Fulani, we don't like the Igbo, we like the Igbo. And no, the question is, what is the antidote to the European nation state that created Africa? They created Africa in their own image. In what image are we creating Africa? So are we going to copy the Europe? Because that is what it means. If you have a Yoruba sovereign state now, you have a nation state. So you are already copying what the Europeans bequeathed on you. And, you just be a copycat. You can't go anywhere. You can't go far with that. So, I mean, that's the bottom line. We can argue that at a different forum. But that is the bottom line, that whether we need a sovereign state or we don't. And if we don't, what do we put in place as a replacement? And then how do we arrive at that place? That's why we say, when we are talking about restructuring the other time and all that,
yes.
Every time people talk about it, then election comes and everybody goes away, because the various peoples that are talking about it have no legitimate way of enforcing it. That is why a politician will come and go, or a politician will come and go. Till today, in the North, especially with the minorities in the North, it appears as if they have even forgotten about the Willings Commission. And we mentioned the Yoruba in Ilorin and Kaba the other time. They were still demanding to be given, and nobody is talking about it, except, of course, us and the Yoruba in Ilorin and Kaba province. So these are issues that need to, and then, when you now put it under the sovereignty, you have a Yoruba sovereign state. Are you going to carve out Ilorin and Kaba from it? Or are you going to include Ilorin and Kaba in it? If you include Ilorin and Kaba in it, it means the boundary will be somewhere in the north. And then you expect the north to say, okay, yeah, go away. That is number one. Number two, the Fulani that you hate so much, they are in control of power in at least 4 African countries, West African countries. Okay, Nigeria, the way it is and all that, is still the most powerful country in West Africa. So if Yoruba nation state, Yoruba sovereign state carves itself for whatever, by whatever means, spiritually or physically, you now have the Fulani in control of 5 countries in West Africa. So if you have them in control of 5 countries in West Africa, and you are the only one, well, you are already choking yourself. So when the Fulani are taking over the countries in those West African countries, they are not looking at a nation state. They are looking at their multinational. They cut across the boundaries. So if they are going to be accommodated, or if they are going to be a relationship, then the simple question is that they cannot, because Nigeria is the crown jewel of the Fulani in West Africa, we cannot allow them to have control, absolute control over Nigeria. And the only way to avoid that is to transform Nigeria into a multinational state. The Fulani will have their own, we have our own. And because we are setting an example for the rest of Africa, because the problem we have in Nigeria, the balance of forces and power and all that, also exists in other parts of Africa. That's why the Ethiopian Tigray issue is ongoing. And the only way they resolved it in Rwanda, we all remember the Rwanda genocide of 1994. So unless such a thing happens, you can't have a successful nation state in Africa. A nationality must become dominant to sustain and impose itself. That was how Europe came into being. That's how they all decided to go their different ways. And that's how it can happen in Africa. And that's how it happened in Rwanda. But we are proposing a different model that will not lead to genocide. A multinational state that will allow everyone to develop their God-given talents or abilities or whatever.
Right.
So that that will be a new beacon for history. That is how to create history. That's how to make history. It's not by copying what already exists, but by transforming it and creating something different. That is what the sovereign people are not doing. The Yoruba sovereign nation, or whatever they call themselves. So that is not what they are doing. So they appear to be more emotional. I'm veering into critiquing them. So let me stop there and just but that's just the general framework that I will see it. And again, it's like it is very disheartening to be reading every day on social, today they have split, tomorrow somebody else is taking over, tomorrow we are not part of it. They have, it means they are not serious. I'm not saying that disagreements or splits. Yes, there will be, but on what basis?
Right.
So I think that's a problem they have to resolve among themselves.
Among them. Okay, thank you very much. Our time is spent, but then I need to ask this because also people are pinching us at the back that, okay, ask this question.
Yeah.
With what is happening just generally within the Yoruba liberation agitation, I mean, your own is about referendum getting legitimacy. We have others that is sloganeering. We have others. And people are saying that, okay, as things are now, that probably some groups they've come to the end of their journey. If there is opportunity for all these groups to sit down and come back to reason, will your group be open to such?
Of course, yes, that's what we have been saying all along. And of course, there's no way to force anybody into any relay. So when they disagree or they don't agree with us, okay, fine, go ahead and do your own. That's why most of the time I try not to be critical of them or directly criticizing them. Yes. So what we are saying is we believe that there's a problem that affects everybody. Yes. And we believe we have a solution. Obviously, so let everybody come together and then debate and discuss and devise means of getting the solution effected. So we are not opposed to that. What we are opposed to is what we have said. We are not going to be grandstanding on Yoruba Nation this, Yoruba Nation that, Yoruba sovereignty. We are going to declare it tomorrow. We are not going to declare it yesterday, and all kinds of things like that. We are not going to be involved in that charade. We are methodical, and we are served and serviced by history of not only Yoruba experience, but also global experience. We bring it to bear on what we are doing, and it can only strengthen us. So we are not opposed. We are not, we won't go into details of everything. Most of the major characters in the Yoruba sovereignty movement today were the first people we approached to push this referendum, and they refused. So it's not something that we have not done, and it's not something we cannot do. So yeah, if anybody wants to come abroad, yeah, we can discuss it, we can debate it, we can agree, we can collaborate, we can, do all sorts of things. So that's not the issue. I mean, the collaboration is not the issue. The collaboration is not the issue. Yeah. I mean, the politicians that they are opposed to, we talk to them because they have a role that they will play. And we argue, we say, yeah, this is the way to go. They say, yeah, but let us do the fine. If you do that, you do this also. So that is how to develop that consensus and arrive at a conclusion. So we are not opposed to that. And we are not bringing anybody by saying, Shibi, that you said this, and we are not going to, no, we are not, so yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Alagbafemi Odedeyi from Yoruba Referendum Committee. For those that have been watching us, or for people that will also watch this later on, the Yoruba Referendum Committee is seeking for the houses of assembly in Yoruba states. We kept mentioning that because we've been having like inquiries or questions about the National Assembly. This has nothing to do with the Nigerian National Assembly. The bill is before the 6 Yoruba states houses of assembly. Those are the representatives of the people. And since it's Southwest, that is where the Yorubas are. And that is talking about nationalities. So it's not with the National Assembly. In fact, it doesn't even involve the president for now. It's still within the 6 Southwest states, that is Lagos, Ogun, Osun, Oyo, Ondo, and which is Ekiti states. So it's with those 6. And like we've also mentioned, for the people that are in Kwara and Kogi, the direction of the Yoruba Referendum Committee is to, first of all, engage with the houses of assembly that are fully Yoruba. And when that one is secured, then it will be easier to get the Yorubas in Kogi and Kwara. So the Yorubas at that end are not left out of the referendum push. And remember, there's a petition right on. If you type Yoruba referendum petition on Google, you will see it there. People have been signing it. Please sign it on change.org. The bill is already before the House, so it's no, the petition is towards a target. The bill is already there, and it's for them to make that bill into law, and other steps will follow. As you have heard, the issue in any multi-ethnic nation is nothing about equity, fairness, or whatever. It is the balance of forces, the balance of power. And that is what we've been experiencing in Nigeria. And not just only in Nigeria, check all other African countries where you have multi-ethnic communities. And not just even only in Africa. We've cited the example of Scotland, where this station is streaming from. We cited Spain, Catalonia. We've cited Ethiopia, which has to do with the Tigray. These are world examples. And of course, Yorubas are not out of this world. Nigeria is not just in the clouds on its own. It's within international community. So the way things are happening in the world should be an example for us to follow, and not just, yes, we can be passionate, but then we have to be realistic. Once again, thank you, Alagba Femi Odedeyi. And one of this without saying also that the Yoruba that wants restructuring in Nigeria, whereas what we have now is like the federalism versus unitary thing. That's what we have in the country now. Some people want the country to remain as is. And why the Fulani might be the one we shout most, we found out that they have people in almost all the ethnic communities. They prefer the unitary government because of the way things are going and what they can get. But the other side is federalism, and which we have practiced before during the regional government, where each side were moving at its own pace. They were developing, and it was easier for one to offer the other one help if they need. Unlike what we have at the moment, which is a unitary government, where the system is stifling the progress of almost all nationalities. Even the Fulani that we're talking about, they are not even having it easy as well. So until next week, because by next Sunday we'll still be coming back.
We'll be coming back.
Continue this discussion. We have to be consistent with it in the lead up to the election. And like Alagbafemi already have said, that it would be good for us to see the bill through to the law before the election. And we can't do it without you, because you are the people and you are the one that those representatives at the state houses of assembly are standing in for. So it's your time to make that demand for them to pass the bill into law, so that we can begin to work towards a Nigeria of many nationalities, each moving at its own pace, progressing, assisting one another, and setting a bright future for our children. Thank you once again, Alagbafemi Odedeye, and of course, all those people that have been with us for the past almost 2 hours. Remember, Alagbafemi Odedeye is going to be on Yoruba Day. Please connect with Yoruba Referendum Committee on Facebook. Type it in your Facebook, Yoruba Referendum Committee, because we will be sharing the streaming from the next one. It's starting by 8 o'clock. I think it will be 9 in Nigeria, 8 in the UK, and would that be 1 p.m. in the United States? Is it?
3 p.m.
Oh, sorry, 3 p.m. I mean, that's about a few minutes, probably about 5 that one is going to start. And then we have him there and other representatives from other Yoruba liberation organizations. So it's going to be interesting. So please do connect to Yoruba Referendum Committee's page on Facebook.
Okay.
So for now, Alagbafemi Odedeye is signing out. Thank you very much, and we
thank you. Thank you very much.
On
next
this
week. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.